Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family: Tom, Kenan, Amber, and Karen. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes heard nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip, no subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight we reach into the list of listener requests with a book that has particular interest for me, because I am a woman who started out life as a horse girl. If you know, you know. Tonight we're relaxing with a classic, On Horsemanship, written by Xenophon and translated by H.D. Dakins. First written around 355 BC. Let's begin. Introduction. Xenophon the Athenian was born 431 BC. He was a pupil of Socrates. He marched with the Spartans and was exiled from Athens. Sparta gave him land and property in Sicily, where he lived for many years before having to move once more to settle in Corinth. He died in 354 BC. On Horsemanship advises the reader on how to buy a good horse and how to raise it to be either a war horse or show horse. Xenophon ends with some words on military equipment for a cavalryman. On Horsemanship 1. Claiming to have attained some proficiency in horsemanship ourselves, as the result of long experience in the field, our wish is to explain for the benefit of our younger friends what we conceive to be the most correct method of dealing with horses. There is, it is true, a treatise on horsemanship written by Simon, the same who dedicated the bronze horse near the Eleusinion in Athens, with a representation of his exploits engraved in relief on the pedestal. But we shall not on that account expunge from our treatise any conclusions in which we happen to agree with that author. On the contrary, we shall hand them on with still greater pleasure to our friends, in the belief that we shall only gain in authority from the fact that so great an expert in horsemanship held similar views to our own. Whilst with regard to matters omitted in his treatise, we shall endeavor to supply them. As our first topic, we shall deal with the question how a man may best avoid being cheated in the purchase of a horse. Take the case of a foal as yet unbroken. It is plain that our scrutiny must begin with the body. An animal that has never yet been mounted can but present the vaguest indications of spirit. Confining ourselves therefore to the body, the first point to examine, we maintain, will be the feet. Just as a house would be of little use, however beautiful its upper stories, if the underlying foundations were not what they ought to be, so there is little use to be extracted from a horse, and in particular a war horse, if unsound in his feet, however excellent his other points, since he could not turn a single one of them to good account. In testing the feet, the first thing to examine will be the horny portion of the hoof. For soundness of foot, a thick horn is far better than a thin. Again, it is important to notice whether the hooves are high both before and behind, or flat to the ground, for a high hoof keeps the frog, as it is called, well off the ground, whereas a low hoof treads equally with the stoutest and softest part of the foot alike, the gait resembling that of a bandy-legged man. You may tell a good foot clearly by the ring, says Simon happily, for the hollow hoof rings like a cymbal against the solid earth. And now that we have begun with the feet, let us ascend from this point to the rest of the body. The bones above the hoof and below the fetlock must not be too straight, like those of a goat. Through not being properly elastic, legs of this type will jar the rider, and are more liable to become inflamed. On the other hand, these bones must not be too low, or else the fetlock will be abraded or lacerated when the horse is galloped over clods and stones. The bones of the shanks ought to be thick, being as they are the columns on which the body rests. Thick in themselves, that is, not puffed out with veins or flesh, or else in riding over hard ground, they will inevitably be surcharged with blood, and varicose conditions be set up, the legs becoming thick and puffy whilst the skin recedes, and with this loosening of the skin, the back sinew is very apt to start and render the horse lame. If the young horse in walking bends his knees flexibly, you may safely conjecture that when he comes to be ridden, he will have flexible legs, since the quality of suppleness invariably increases with age. Supple knees are highly esteemed, and with good reason, rendering as they do the horse less liable to stumble or break down from fatigue than those of stiffer build. Coming to the thighs below the shoulder blades, these, if thick and muscular, present a stronger and handsomer appearance, just as in the case of a human being. Again, a comparatively broad chest is better alike for strength and beauty, and better adapted to carry the legs well asunder, so that they will not overlap and interfere with one another. Again, the neck should not be set on dropping forward from the chest like a boar's, but like that of a gamecock rather. It should shoot upwards to the crest, and be slack along the curvature, whilst the head should be bony and the jawbone small. In this way the neck will be well in front of the rider, and the eye will command what lies before the horse's feet. A horse, moreover, of this build, however spirited, will be least capable of overmastering the rider, since it is not by arching, but by stretching out his neck and head, that a horse endeavors to assert his power. Again, a prominent rather than a sunken eye is suggestive of alertness, and a horse of this type will have a wider range of vision. And so of the nostrils. A wide dilated nostril is at once better than a contracted one for respiration, and gives the animal a fiercer aspect. Note how, for instance, when one stallion is enraged against another, or when his spirit chafes in being ridden, the nostrils at once become dilated. A comparatively large crest and small ears give a more typical and horse-like appearance to the head, whilst lofty withers again allow the rider a surer seat and a stronger adhesion between the shoulders and the body. A double spine, again, is at once softer to sit on than a single, and more pleasing to the eye. So, too, a fairly deep side, somewhat rounded towards the belly, will render the animal at once easier to sit and stronger, and as a general rule, better able to digest his food. The broader and shorter the loins, the more easily will the horse raise his forequarters and bring up his hindquarters under him. Given these points, moreover, the belly will appear as small as possible, a portion of the body which, if large, is partly a disfigurement, and partly tends to make the horse less strong and capable of carrying weight. The quarters should be broad and fleshy in correspondence with the sides and chest, and if they are also firm and solid throughout, they will be all the lighter for the race course, and will render the horse in every way more fleet. To come to the thighs and buttocks, if the horse have these separated by a broad line of demarcation, he will be able to plant his hind legs under him with a good gap between, and in so doing will assume a posture and a gait in action, at once prouder and more firmly balanced, and in every way appear to the best advantage. The human subject would seem to point to this conclusion. When a man wants to lift anything from off the ground, he essays to do so by bringing the legs apart, and not by bringing them together. And now, as regards the lower parts, the hocks or shanks and fetlocks and hooves, we have only to repeat what has been said already about those of the forelegs. I will here note some indications by which one may forecast the probable size of the grown animal. The colt with the longest shanks at the moment of being foaled will grow into the biggest horse. The fact being, and it holds of all the domestic quadrupeds, that with advance of time the legs hardly increase at all, while the rest of the body grows uniformly up to these until it has attained its proper symmetry. Such is the type of colt, and such the test to be applied, with every prospect of getting a sound-footed, strong and fleshy animal, fine of form and large of stature. If changes in some instances develop during growth, that need not prevent us from applying our tests in confidence. It far more often happens that an ugly-looking colt will turn out serviceable than that a foal of the above description will turn out ugly or defective. 2. The right method of breaking a colt needs no description at our hands. As a matter of state organization, cavalry duties usually devolve upon those who are not stinted in means, and who have a considerable share in the government. And it seems far better for a young man to give heed to his own health of body and to horsemanship, or if he already knows how to ride with skill, to practicing maneuvers, than that he should set up as a trainer of horses. The older man has his town property and his friends, and the 101 concerns of state or of war, on which to employ his time and energies, rather than on horse breaking. It is plain, then, that anyone holding my views on the subject will put a young horse out to be broken. But in doing so, he ought to draw up articles, just as a father does when he apprentices his son to some art or handicraft, stating what sort of knowledge the young creature is to be sent back possessed of. These will serve as indications to the trainer what points he must pay special heed to if he is to earn his fee. At the same time, pains should be taken on the owner's part to see that the colt is gentle, tractable, and affectionate when delivered to the professional trainer. That is a condition of things which for the most part may be brought about at home and by the groom. If he knows how to let the animal connect hunger and thirst and the annoyance of flies with solitude, whilst associating food and drink and escape from sources of irritation with the presence of man. As the result of this treatment, necessarily the young horse will acquire not fondness merely, but an absolute craving for human beings. A good deal can be done by touching, stroking, patting those parts of the body which the creature likes to have so handled. These are the hairiest parts, or where, if there is anything annoying him, the horse can least of all apply relief himself. The groom should have standing orders to take his charge through crowds, and to make him familiar with all sorts of sights and noises, and if the colt shows signs of apprehension at them, he must teach him, not by cruel but by gentle handling, that they are not really formidable. On this topic, then, of training, the rules here given will, I think, suffice for any private individual. 3. To meet the case in which the object is to buy a horse already fit for riding, we will set down certain memoranda, which, if applied intelligently, may save the purchaser from being cheated. First, then, let there be no mistake about the age. If the horse has lost his milk teeth, not only will the purchaser's hopes be blighted, but he may find himself saddled forever with a sorry bargain. Given that the fact of youth is well established, let there be no mistake about another matter. How does he take the bit into his mouth and the headstall over his ears? There need be little ambiguity on this score, if the purchaser will see the bit inserted and again removed under his eyes. Next, let it be carefully noted how the horse stands being mounted. Many horses are extremely loath to admit the approach of anything which, if once accepted, clearly means to them enforced exertion. Another point to ascertain is whether the horse, when mounted, can be induced to leave other horses, or when being ridden past a group of horses standing, will not bolt off to join the company. Some horses, again, as the result of bad training, will run away from the exercising ground and make for the stable. A hard mouth may be detected by the exercised called the pede or volte, and still more so by varying the direction of the volte to right or left. Many horses will not attempt to run away except for the concurrence of a bad mouth along with an avenue of escape home. Another point which it is necessary to learn is whether, when let go at full speed, the horse can be pulled up sharp and is willing to wheel round in obedience to the rein. It is also well to ascertain by experience if the horse you propose to purchase will show equal docility in response to the whip. Everyone knows what a useless thing a servant is, or a body of troops that will not obey. A disobedient horse is not only useless, but may easily play the part of an arrant traitor. And since it is assumed that the horse to be purchased is intended for war, we must widen our test to include everything which war itself can bring to the proof, such as leaping ditches, scrambling over walls, scaling up and springing off high banks. We must test his paces by galloping him up and down steep pitches and sharp inclines and along a slant, for each and all of these will serve as a touchstone to gauge the endurance of his spirit and the soundness of his body. I am far from saying, indeed, that because an animal fails to perform all these parts to perfection, he must straightway be rejected, since many a horse will fall short at first, not from inability, but from want of experience. With teaching, practice, and habit, almost any horse will come to perform all these feats beautifully, provided he be sound and free from vice. Only you must beware of a horse that is naturally of a nervous temperament. An over-timorous animal will not only prevent the rider from using the vantage ground of its back to strike an enemy, but is as likely as not to bring him to earth himself and plunge him into the worst of straits. We must also find out if the horse shows any viciousness towards other horses or towards human beings, also whether he is skittish. Such defects are apt to cause his owner trouble. As to any reluctance on the horse's part to being bitted or mounted, dancing and twisting about and the rest, you will get a more exact idea on this score if, when he has gone through his work, you will try and repeat the precise operations which he went through before you began your ride. Any horse that, having done his work, shows a readiness to undergo it all again, affords sufficient evidence thereby of spirit and endurance. To put the matter in a nutshell, given that the horse is sound-footed, gentle, moderately fast, willing and able to undergo toil, and above all things obedient, such an animal, we venture to predict, will give the least trouble and the greatest security to his rider in the circumstances of war, while conversely a beast who either out of sluggishness needs much driving, or from excess of mettle much coaxing and maneuvering, will give his rider work enough to occupy both his hands and a sinking of the heart when dangers thicken. 4. We will now suppose the purchaser has found a horse which he admires. The purchase is effected, and he has brought him home. How is he to be housed? It is best that the stable should be placed in a quarter of the establishment, where the master will see the horse as often as possible. It is a good thing also to have his stall so arranged that there will be as little risk of the horse's food being stolen from the manger as of the master's from his larder or store closet. To neglect a detail of this kind is surely to neglect oneself, since in the hour of danger it is certain the owner has to consign himself, life and limb, to the safe keeping of his horse. Nor is it only to avoid the risk of food being stolen that a secure horse box is desirable, but for the further reason that if the horse takes to scattering his food, the action is at once detected, and anyone who observes that happening may take it as a sign and symptom either of too much blood, which calls for veterinary aid, or of over-fatigue, for which rest is the cure, or else that an attack of indigestion or some other malady is coming on, and just as with human beings, So with the horse, all diseases are more curable at their commencement than after they have become chronic or been wrongly treated. But if food and exercise with a view to strengthening the horse's body are matters of prime consideration, no less important is it to pay attention to the feet. A stable with a damp and smooth floor will spoil the best hoof which nature can give. To prevent the floor being damp, it should be sloped with channels, and to avoid smoothness, paved with cobblestones sunk side by side in the ground and similar in size to the horse's hooves. A stable floor of this sort is calculated to strengthen the horse's feet by the mere pressure on the part in standing. In the next place, it will be the groom's business to lead out the horse somewhere to comb and curry him, and after his morning's feed, to unhalter him from the manger, so that he may come to his evening meal with greater relish. To secure the best type of stable yard, and with a view to strengthening the horse's feet, I would suggest to take and throw down loosely 4 or 5 wagon loads of pebbles, each as large as can be grasped in the hand and about a pound in weight, the whole to be fenced round with a skirting of iron to prevent scattering. The mere standing on these will come to precisely the same thing, as if for a certain portion of the day the horse were off and on, stepping along a stony road. Whilst being curried, or when fidgeted by flies, he will be forced to use his hooves just as much as if he were walking. Nor is it the hooves merely, but a surface so strewn with stones will tend to harden the frog of the foot also. But if care is needed to make the hooves hard, similar pains should be taken to make the mouth and jaws soft. And the same means and appliances which will render a man's flesh and skin soft will serve to soften and supple a horse's mouth. 5. It is the duty of a horseman, as we think, to have his groom trained thoroughly in all that concerns the treatment of the horse. In the first place, then, the groom should know that he is never to knot the halter at the point where the headstall is attached to the horse's head. By constantly rubbing his head against the manger, if the halter does not sit quite loose about the ears, the horse will be constantly injuring himself. And with sores so set up, it is inevitable that he should show peevishness while being bitted or rubbed down. It is desirable that the groom should be ordered to carry out the dung and litter of the horse to some one place each day. By so doing, he will discharge the duty with least trouble to himself, and at the same time be doing the horse a kindness. The groom should also be instructed to attach the muzzle to the horse's mouth, both when taking him out to be groomed and to the rolling ground. In fact, he should always muzzle him whenever he takes him anywhere without the bit. The muzzle, while it is no hindrance to respiration, prevents biting, and when attached, it serves to rob the horse of opportunity for vice. Again, care should be taken to tie the horse up with the halter above his head. A horse's natural instinct, in trying to rid himself of anything that irritates the face, is to toss up his head, and by this upward movement, if so tied, he only slackens the chain instead of snapping it. In rubbing the horse down, the groom should begin with the head and mane, as until the upper parts are clean, it is vain to cleanse the lower. Then, as regards the rest of the body, first brush up the hair, by help of all the ordinary implements for cleansing, and then beat out the dust, following the lie of the hair. The hair on the spine and dorsal region ought not to be touched with any instrument whatever. The hand alone should be used to rub and smooth it, and in the direction of its natural growth, so as to preserve from injury that part of the horse's back on which the rider sits. The head should be drenched with water simply, for being bony, if you try to cleanse it with iron or wooden instruments, injury may be caused. So too the forelock should be merely wetted. The long hairs of which it is composed, without hindering the animal's vision, serve to scare away from the eyes anything that might trouble them. Providence, we must suppose, bestowed these hairs upon the horse, instead of the large ears which are given to the ass and the mule as a protection to the eyes. The tail again and mane should be washed, the object being to help the hairs to grow, those in the tail so as to allow the creature the greatest reach possible in brushing away molesting objects, and those of the neck in order that the rider may have as free a grip as possible. Mane, forelock, and tail are triple gifts bestowed by the gods upon the horse, for the sake of pride and ornament, and here is the proof. A brood mare, so long as her mane is long and flowing, will not readily suffer herself to be covered by an ass. Hence breeders of mules take care to clip the mane of the mare, with a view to covering. Washing of the legs we are inclined to dispense with. No good is done, but rather harm to the hooves by this daily washing. So too excessive cleanliness of the belly is to be discouraged. The operation itself is most annoying to the horse, and the cleaner these parts are made, the thicker the swarm of troublesome things which collect beneath the belly. Besides which, however elaborately you clean these parts, the horse is no sooner let out than presently he will be just as dirty as if he had not been cleaned. Omit these ablutions then, we say, and similarly for the legs, rubbing and currying by hand is quite sufficient. 6. We will now explain how the operation of grooming may be performed with least danger to oneself and best advantage to the horse. If the groom attempts to clean the horse with his face turned the same way as the horse, he runs the risk of getting a knock in the face from the animal's knee or hoof. When cleaning him, he should turn his face in the opposite direction to the horse, and planting himself well out of the way of his leg, at an angle to his shoulder blade, proceed to rub him down. He will then escape all mischief, and he will be able to clean the frog by folding back the hoof. Let him clean the hind legs in the same way. The man who has to do with the horse should know, with regard to this and all other necessary operations, that he ought to approach as little as possible from the head or the tail to perform them, for if the horse attempt to show vice, he is master of the man in front and rear. But by approaching from the side, he will get the greatest hold over the horse, with the least risk of injury to himself. When the horse has to be led, we do not approve of leading him from in front, for the simple reason that the person so leading him robs himself of his power of self-protection, whilst he leaves the horse freedom to do what he likes. On the other hand, we take a little exception to the plan of training the horse to go forward on a long rein and lead the way, and for this reason. It gives the horse the opportunity of mischief, in whichever direction he likes on either flank, and the power also to turn right about and face his driver. How can a troop of horses be kept free of one another if driven in this fashion from behind? Whereas a horse accustomed to be led from the side will have least power of mischief to horse or man, and at the same time be in the best position to be mounted by the rider at a moment's notice were it necessary. In order to insert the bit correctly, the groom should, in the first place, approach on the near side of the horse, and then throwing the reins over his head, let them drop loosely on the withers. Raise the headstall in his right hand, and with his left present the bit. If the horse will take the bit, it is a simple business to adjust the strap of the headstall. But if he refuses to open his mouth, the groom must hold the bit against the teeth, and at the same time insert the thumb of his left hand inside the horse's jaws. Most horses will open their mouths to that operation, but if he still refuses, then the groom must press the lip against the tush. Very few horses will refuse the bit when that is done to them. The groom can hardly be too much alive to the following points if any work is to be done. In fact, so important is it that the horse should readily take his bit, that, to put it tersely, a horse that will not take it is good for nothing. Now, if the horse be bitted not only when he has work to do, but also when he is being taken to his food, and when he is being led home from a ride, it would be no great marvel if he learnt to take the bit of his own accord when first presented to him. It would be good for the groom to know how to give a leg up in the Persian fashion, so that in case of illness or infirmity of age, the master himself may have a man to help him onto horseback without trouble, or if he so wish, be able to oblige a friend with a man to mount him. The one best precept, the golden rule, in dealing with a horse is never to approach him angrily. Anger is so devoid of forethought that it will often drive a man to do things which in a calmer mood he will regret. Thus, when a horse is shy of any object and refuses to approach it, you must teach him that there is nothing to be alarmed at, particularly if he be a plucky animal, or, failing that, touch the formidable object yourself, and then gently lead the horse up to it. The opposite plan of forcing the frightened creature by blows only intensifies its fear, the horse mentally associating the pain he suffers at such a moment with the object of suspicion, which he naturally regards as its cause. If, when the groom brings up the horse to his master to mount, he knows how to make him lower his back to facilitate mounting, we have no fault to find. Still, we consider that the horseman should practice and be able to mount, even if the horse does not so lend himself, since on another occasion, another type of horse may fall to the rider's lot, nor can the same rider be always served by the same equerry. 7. The master, let us suppose, has received his horse and is ready to mount. We will now prescribe certain rules to be observed in the interests not only of the horseman, but of the animal which he bestrides. First, then, he should take the leading rein, which hangs from the chin strap or noseband, conveniently in his left hand, held slack so as not to jerk the horse's mouth, whether he means to mount by hoisting himself up, catching hold of the mane behind the ears, or to vault onto horseback by help of his spear. With the right hand, he should grip the reins along with a tuft of hair beside the shoulder joint, so that he may not in any way wrench the horse's mouth with the bit while mounting. In the act of taking the spring off the ground for mounting, he should hoist his body by help of the left hand, and with the right at full stretch, assist the upward movement, a position in mounting which will present a graceful spectacle also from behind. At the same time, with the leg well bent, and taking care not to place his knee on the horse's back, he must pass his leg clean over to the off side, and so, having brought his foot well round, plant himself firmly on his seat. To meet the case in which the horseman may chance to be leading his horse with the left hand and carrying his spear in the right, it would be good, we think, for everyone to practice vaulting onto his seat from the right side also. In fact, he has nothing else to learn except to do with his right limbs what he has previously done with the left, and vice versa. And the reason we approve of this method of mounting is that it enables the soldier at one and the same instant to get astride of his horse and to find himself prepared at all points, supposing he should have to enter the lists of battle on a sudden. But now, supposing the rider fairly seated, whether bareback or on a saddle-cloth, a good seat is not that of a man seated on a chair, but rather the pose of a man standing upright with his legs apart. In this way he will be able to hold on to the horse more firmly by his thighs, and this erect attitude will enable him to hurl a javelin or to strike a blow from horseback, if occasion calls, with more vigorous effect. The leg and foot should hang loosely from the knee. By keeping the leg stiff, the rider is apt to have it broken in collision with some obstacle, whereas a flexible leg will yield to the impact, and at the same time not shift the thigh from its position. The rider should also accustom the whole of his body above the hips to be as supple as possible, for thus he will enlarge his scope of action, and in case of a tug or shove, be less liable to be unseated. Next, when the rider is seated, he must, in the first place, teach his horse to stand quiet, until he has drawn his skirts from under him if need be, and got the reins an equal length, and grasped his spear in the handiest fashion. And in the next place, he should keep his left arm close to his side. This position will give the rider absolute ease and freedom, and his hand the firmest hold. As to reins, we recommend those which are well balanced, without being weak or slippery or thick, so that when necessary, the hand which holds them can also grasp a spear. As soon as the rider gives the signal to the horse to start, he should begin at a walking pace, which will tend to allay his excitement. If the horse is inclined to droop his head, the rein should be held pretty high, or somewhat low if he is disposed to carry his head high. This will set off the horse's bearing to the best advantage. Presently, as he falls into a natural trot, he will gradually relax his limbs without the slightest suffering, and so come more agreeably to the gallop. Since, too, the preference is given to starting on the left foot, it will best conduce to that lead if, while the horse is still trotting, the signal to gallop should be given at the instant of making a step with his right foot. As he is on the point of lifting his left foot, he will start upon it, and while turning left, will simultaneously make the first bound of the gallop, since as a matter of instinct a horse, on being turned to the right, leads off with his right limbs and to the left with his left. As an exercise, we recommend what is called the volte, since it habituates the animal to turn to either hand, while a variation in the order of the turn is good as involving an equalization of both sides of the mouth in first one and then the other half of the exercise. But of the two, we commend the oval form of the volte rather than the circular, for the horse, being already sated with the straight course, will be all the more ready to turn, and will be practiced at once in the straight course and in wheeling. At the curve he should be held up, because it is neither easy nor indeed safe, when the horse is at full speed, to turn sharp, especially if the ground is broken or slippery. But in collecting him, the rider should as little as possible sway the horse obliquely with the bit, and as little as possible incline his own body, or he may rest assured a trifle will suffice to stretch him and his horse full length upon the ground. The moment the horse has his eyes fixed on the straight course after making a turn is the time to urge him to full speed. In battle, obviously, these turns and wheelings are with a view to charging or retiring. Consequently, to practice quickening the pace after wheeling is desirable. When the horse seems to have had enough of the manège, it would be good to give him a slight pause, and then suddenly to put him to his quickest, away from his fellows first, and now towards them, and then again to quiet him down in mid-career as short as possible, and from halt once more to turn him right about, and off again full charge. It is easy to predict that the day will come when there will be need of each of these maneuvers. When the moment to dismount has come, you should never do so among other horses, nor near a group of people, nor outside the exercising ground, but on the precise spot which is the scene of his compulsory exertion. There let the horse find also relaxation. 8. As there will doubtless be times when the horse will need to race downhill and uphill and on sloping ground, times also when he will need to leap across an obstacle, or take a flying leap from off a bank, or jump down from a height, the rider must teach and train himself and his horse to meet all emergencies. In this way the two will have a chance of saving each the other, and may be expected to increase their usefulness. And here, if any reader should accuse us of repeating ourselves, on the ground that we are only stating now what we said before on the same topics, we say that this is not mere repetition. In the former case, we confined ourselves to advising the purchaser, before he concluded his bargain, to test whether the horse could do those particular things. What we are now maintaining is that the owner ought to teach his own horse, and we will explain how this teaching is to be done. With a horse entirely ignorant of leaping, the best way is to take him by the leading rein which hangs loose, and to get across the trench yourself first, and then to pull tight on the leading rein to induce him to leap across. If he refuses, someone with a whip or switch should apply it smartly. The result will be that the horse will clear at a bound, not the distance merely, but a far larger space than requisite, and for the future there will be no need for an actual blow. As soon as he is accustomed to leap in this way, you may mount him and put him first at smaller and then at larger trenches. At the moment of the spring, be ready to apply the spur, and so too when training him to leap up and leap down, you should touch him with the spur at the critical instant. In the effort to perform any of these actions with the whole body, the horse will certainly perform them with more safety to himself and to his rider than he will if his hind quarters lag in taking a ditch or fence, or in making an upward spring or downward jump. To face a steep incline, you must first teach him on soft ground, and finally, when he is accustomed to that, he will much prefer the downward to the upward slope for a fast pace. And as to the apprehension which some people entertain, that a horse may dislocate the shoulder in galloping down an incline, it should encourage them to learn that the Persians and Odrysians all run races down precipitous slopes, and their horses are every bit as sound as our own. Nor must we omit another topic, how the rider is to accommodate himself to these several movements. Thus, when the horse breaks off into a gallop, the rider ought to bend forward, since the horse will be less likely to slip from under, and so to pitch his rider off. So again, in pulling him up short, the rider should lean back and thus escape a shock. In leaping a ditch or tearing up a steep incline, it is no bad plan to let go the reins and take hold of the mane, so that the animal may not feel the burden of the bit in addition to that of the ground. In going down a steep incline, the rider must throw himself right back and hold in the horse with the bit, to prevent himself being hurled head foremost down the slope himself, if not his horse. It is a correct principle to vary these exercises, which should be gone through sometimes in one place and sometimes in another, and should sometimes be shorter and sometimes longer in duration. The horse will take much more kindly to them if you do not confine him to one place and one routine. Since it is a matter of prime necessity that the rider should keep his seat while galloping full speed on every sort of ground, and at the same time be able to use his weapons with effect on horseback, nothing could be better, where the country suits and there are wild animals, than to practice horsemanship in combination with the chase. But when these resources fail, a good exercise may be supplied in the combined efforts of two horsemen. One of them will play the part of fugitive, retreating helter-skelter over every sort of ground, with lance reversed and plying the butt end. The other pursues with buttons on his javelins and his lance similarly handled. Whenever he comes within javelin range, he lets fly at the retreating foeman with his blunted missiles, or whenever within spear thrust, he deals the overtaken combatant a blow. In coming to close quarters, it is a good plan first to drag the foeman towards oneself, and then on a sudden to thrust him off. That is a device to bring him to the ground. The correct plan for the man so dragged is to press his horse forward, by which action the man who is being dragged is more likely to unhorse his assailant than to be brought to the ground himself. If it ever happens that you have an enemy's camp in front, and cavalry skirmishing is the order of the day, at one time charging the enemy right up to the hostile battle line, and again beating a retreat, under these circumstances it is well to bear in mind that so long as the skirmisher is close to his own party, valor and discretion alike dictate to wheel and charge in the vanguard might and main. But when he finds himself in close proximity to the foe, he must keep his horse well in hand. This, in all probability, will enable him to do the greatest mischief to the enemy and to receive least damage at his hands. The gods have bestowed on man indeed the gift of teaching man his duty by means of speech and reasoning. But the horse, it is obvious, is not open to instruction by speech and reasoning. If you would have a horse learn to perform his duty, your best plan will be, whenever he does as you wish, to show him some kindness in return, and when he is disobedient, to chastise him. This principle, though capable of being stated in a few words, is one which holds good throughout the whole of horsemanship. As, for instance, a horse will more readily take the bit if each time he accepts it, some good befalls him. Or again, he will leap ditches and spring up embankments and perform all the other feats incumbent upon him, if he be led to associate obedience to the word of command with relaxation. And with that advice about the power of kindness, I think we'll end this evening's reading from On Horsemanship by Xenophon. It may be 2,400 years old, but it seems like pretty practical advice, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to read this work for yourself, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.